'Tis the season of giving, and I wanted to give my friends a little Bath & Body gift set, and what better place to go to than Lush? They have bar soap, bath bombs, bubble bars, and everything I need to make the perfect best of all worlds gift.
Doesn't it seem superfluous?
The only problem is Lush ain't cheap, and I wasn't about to fork out $700 for 12 little gift bags. I don't worship my friends. So I turned to yours truly to devise a plan to create a Bath & Body gift set that rivals Lush in value. Strap in, grab your eggnog, because we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Here's the plan. I want a good mix of Bath & Body products. I want this gift set to contain a bath bomb, a bubble bar, a candle, and a bar of soap. I'll also use some Dollarama supplies to package it all nicely into a little gift bag. This is not going to be a Lush copycat video. If that's the snack you're craving, I have a great intergalactic bath bomb copycat video you shall feast on. Speaking of bath bombs, let's make a bath bomb. I took inspiration from Lush's flat bath bombs, which create these really beautiful ribbons of color in the water like this one shown here. I'm designing my bath bomb to be a flat snowflake, so when you place it in the bath, it gently floats around and shoots beams of snowy blue from it. To get those really saturated beams of color, I'm using pure Blue 1 to do the job, which gets about as much action in the food industry as Gordon Ramsay, whatever that means. Blue 1 is a water-soluble dye that needs to be bloomed before use. Why do we need to bloom it? Because the color initially looks like this. Browny, purpley, bloomed Blue 1 is their profile pic, normal Blue 1 is real life. I'm going to carefully measure a quarter teaspoon of dye and dissolve it in 10 grams of boiling water. There we go, look at how beautiful that blue is. It's like a Smurf had a nosebleed. I've measured out 100 grams of baking soda, which will be the vehicle for my super duper concentrated dye powder. I'm going for a 1% concentration, which sounds small, but it's not. You'll die at the dyeing power of this dye. I pour my Smurf blood into the baking soda and whisk it up until there's minimal clumpage. There might be some clumps here and there, but that's okay because we're going to let this paste dry for at least 24 hours and then pass it through a sieve. For my wet ingredients, I'm going to add 6 milliliters of evergreen fragrance, which is just another name for nostril Narnia. Does that make sense? It's just everything you want in a forest scent captured in a bottle. I'm also going to add 18 drops of cypress oil, which has a robust woody smell that'll help carry that evergreen fragrance, and then 9 drops of wintergreen oil, which will help give my fragrance blend an extra note of depth. Now, I'm just going to say, I'm not big on aromatherapy, but I do think there are benefits to using essential oils for the skin. And there is some evidence to suggest that wintergreen oil is anti-inflammatory and cypress oil is antibacterial, taken with a fine grain of salt. Side note, my room smells like the Bath & Body Works fresh balsam candle, but with a bowl of spearmint heads nearby, it's a wintry delight. I'm going to add 5 milliliters of water, which is an overlooked ingredient I think every bath bomb needs in order to get nice and hard. Now, we'll need a way to bind those oils in water, so I'm going to squirt 6 milliliters of polysorbate 80, which acts as an emulsifier that helps keep all of the oils in the bath bomb essentially dissolved in the bath water. I'll give it a whirl with my tornado tool, and this is the fun chemistry part, the mechanics of which I don't fully understand. Something about adding the emulsifier makes the solution really thick and snotty, which is a good thing because it won't activate our dry mix too much. Speaking of which, the dry mix will contain baking soda, 325 grams, cream of tartar, which will help make it nice and hard, 17 grams, SLSA, which will help slow down the chemical reaction and make the colors all foamy, I'll do 17 grams of that. I make sure to sift the dries carefully because SLSA powder is irritating to your mucous membranes, and I don't really feel like suffering right now, so the less poof the better. Now I have to carefully add 12 grams of those wets we blended earlier, which are having a jolly old time pretending to be Vaseline. I give that a bit of a mix, and now our white portion of the snowflake is pretty much prepared. I just want to add some Super Sparkle White Diamonds mica, which is a chunkier mica that looks like Super Sparkle White Diamonds, and it's my favorite mica to use when I need sparkles. It really does look like a snowbank glimmering in the cold winter daylight. Now, I want a blizzard in the bathtub, so I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of that, and then I'll also add 1 teaspoon of titanium dioxide off camera because I'm a narc and didn't record that part. But the TD is going to make the water a little murky so it actually looks like you're caught in a blizzard. With the white mix done, we have 2 blue mixes to make. For the light blue, I'm dividing 65 grams of the white mix we just made and adding half a teaspoon of blue-green mica from Windy Point. I wish this mica had a real name because its gorgeosity demands one. I'm going to call it Finding Marlin, the third installment in Pixar's Nemo trilogy. Mixing it up, we get a gentle glacial blue, which will add a nice icy shimmer to the bathwater. Now the fun part, the supersonically saturated blue mix. I'm gonna sift my colored baking soda, which stains really easily, I'm gonna add, so refrain from using actual fingers to press it through. Unless you wish to look like you're part of Blue Man Group, go ahead. Into that, I'm gonna add the rest of my Vaseline goop, as well as 4 grams each of cream of tartar and SLSA, and then mix it all up. Finally, I've got to add citric acid to all of my mixes to convert them from fancy bath coloring to fizzy bath bombs. I'm going to add 175 grams into the big white snowy mix, 38 grams into my icy glacier mix, and then 38 grams again to my super blue. I've put on some gloves because bath bomb mix irritates my eczema prone skin covered noodles which like to masquerade as human appendages. A lot of professional bath bomb makers like to use stand mixers to mix everything together, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't envious of any of them. My fingers got immediately crampy after mixing up the first bowl, and I had 2 more bowls of mix to torture them with. I'm mixing from light to dark, which is a habit I'd encourage you all to follow, because it helps prevent any obvious sort of contamination between colors. Getting a bit of white mix into super blue is fine, while getting a bit of super blue into the white would make me asphyxiate. With all of my mixes prepared, it's time to mold them into snowflakes. I found this silicone snowflake mold at HomeSense. In case you don't know, HomeSense is a Canadian home furnishing store which has every random item under the sun, and I was fortunate enough to find this snowflake mold hanging between the rainbow whisk and the hot cocoa bombs. I'm a little concerned with how flimsy the silicone is, but the pink evidence of my prior tests shows that they were probably successful, and that this is just fabricated suspense designed to keep you watching. Or is it? I'm doing 2 tablespoons of white mix into each snowflake cavity, then I settle it with an earthquake, and then I add some lines of color powder on top. I want to keep the lines pretty thin so they make really nice ribbons of color in the bath. Then I go ahead and seal those colors up with 2 more tablespoons of Snow White and endure the arduous task of compressing all of that powder down evenly. I wanted the bottoms of the bath bombs to be as flat and pristine as possible, so I went back a couple times and pushed into the powder, really making sure to compress those corner details where the bath bombs might be fragile. Rinse and repeat. Since these are bath bombs that aren't traditionally molded, and since they have intricate details that might be fragile, I wanted them to completely harden inside the mold before removing them. So I left them in my closet for a week with a few silica gel packets, which are those annoying little bags that fall out of your belongings when you least expect it. They're really useful because they're a desiccant. They love water and suck it from the air. Uber useful if you live in a rainforest. With all that treatment, these bath bombs are dry as a bone, so they're ready to come out. The first snowflake actually looks great. There's a little oops on that ice branch there, but I'm expecting these bath bombs to suffer a little damage. They're also a little powdery because they weren't compressed strongly, but no snowflake is perfect. Whoa, okay. This one didn't work very well. It's okay, the design was ugly anyways. 2 weeks later, I've made 12 of these bath bombs and they're ready to be packaged. I'm super excited to see how these ones perform in the bathwater. Next, coming up is the bubble bar. I'm going for a classic bubble bar Swiss roll sort of design with a pretty red and green spiral. Bubble bars undergo a very similar process to bath bombs. It's basically just measure your wets and dries and mix them together. In this case, one of my fragrances contains vanillin and will discolor the bubble bar, so I want to make sure I keep that fragrance out of the white portion. Getting started on the white dough, the wets consist of 200 grams water, 8 grams of polysorbate 80, and then 60 drops of peppermint oil. I'm using peppermint oil for its cooling properties and because it may help relieve itchy skin, which my legs desperately need at approximately 8:43 p.m. every evening. Like, what is going on? I'll also add 1 teaspoon of Super Sparkle Diamonds Mica because I lack any sort of self-restraint. Every single winter product I make needs an unconstitutional amount of Super Sparkle White Diamonds. I'll also add half a teaspoon of titanium dioxide to make the dough even whiter, and also to help counteract any discoloration that might bleed in from the red and green doughs. Speaking of which, my plan for the red and green doughs is to make 1 batch of dough and then divide it in 2. Less work, less cleanup, less stress, more fun. So my second batch of wets is the exact same as the first batch, except I'm excluding the colorants and adding some synthetic fragrances. Those are Vanilla Mint and Vanilla Bean Marshmallow from Voyager Soap and Candle. Vanilla Mint is a really nice, sweet, fluffy peppermint fragrance. It's almost like a dupe of Twisted Peppermint from Bath & Body Works. Vanilla Bean Marshmallow is also one of my all-time favorites. It's a sweet, slightly musky vanilla and is reminiscent of roasty, toasty marshmallow. I'll measure 10 grams of vanilla mint into the bowl, and then 5 grams of vanilla bean marshmallow. The benefit of bubble bars is you have a lot more wiggle room with the liquids. It's not like bath bombs where one extra drop of water destroys it. I find bubble bars a lot more beginner friendly for that reason. I'm measuring the dries for my white dough, which calls for 185 grams baking soda, 80 grams cornstarch, 80 grams cream of tartar, and 80 grams SLSA, all of the ingredients listed below. This is my own recipe that I've experimented with, and I've found that using a high ratio of cornstarch really gives the dough structure and prevents it from falling apart so easily. The only caveat is you need a lot more water to get a workable dough. The purpose of the cream of tartar is as a hardening agent, but a lot of it will react with the baking soda and water to create carbon dioxide gas and sodium tartrate, which is a salt that's harmless to the skin and is commonly used as a food additive. I don't recommend eating your bath water. Without thinking, I added all of the water in one go. I wouldn't recommend doing that because if you end up adding too much water, then you'll completely throw off the ratios and you'll cause the whole mix to bubble up out of the bowl. It sounds like I'm speaking from experience, doesn't it? Just add the water little by little until you get a dough that's slightly sticky. I've purposely constructed this recipe with too little water so you can tailor the amount you need to add because everyone's climate is different, everyone's ingredients are different, and everyone's bubble bars are going to be different. I'll measure out the dries for my second batch, which will take 165 grams baking soda, 70 grams cornstarch, 70 grams of that tartar cream, and 40 grams SLSA. I'm also going to add 80 grams of colloidal oatmeal, which is essentially just really finely ground oatmeal, which is very good for the skin and has proven benefits in reducing skin inflammation. I know it's oatmeal, but again, I'd encourage you not to eat your bath water. I decided to add the oatmeal to the colored part of the bubble bar because it's beige in color and I don't want to taint that beautiful white dough. To each of my dries, I add enough water to get to the consistency I want, which is very similar to chocolate cookie dough. 3 drops of water shy of being tacky. I didn't capture it on camera, but if your dough starts growing, just disturb it with your spatula for a few minutes to ride out the chemical reaction. I'm going to have batch B to make my red and green doughs, and I'm totally just eyeballing it here. For the red, I'm using half a teaspoon Crimson Heart Mica, which is a super sparkly, lustful, rich maroon for flogabite. I'll also use a 1/4 teaspoon Neon Hot Pink Kisses powder to lift it up a bit. Kneading it together, it takes on a ghastly meaty color. Don't worry, it'll look a bit better in the bubble bar. Which is what I tell myself behind a curtain of doubt. For the green, I'm using half a teaspoon Jungle Green Mica, which is a dark muted forest green, and a 1/4 teaspoon Neon Bright Green powder to lift it up. If you're a long-time Soap Universe stan, you probably remember the second soap I ever made on this channel. These are the exact colors I used to get that really pretty peppermint swirl in that soap, so this bubble bar is a nice little callback to that. My workspace will consist of a piece of parchment paper and a dusting of baking soda. I'm taking half of my white dough and flattening it into a circle, not really caring about the thickness because I'll flatten it later. Next, I dump on all of the green, making sure to leave a centimeter or 2 around the edges so the roll looks neat. I repeat that process with the rest of the white and then all of the red, and at last my dough is ready to shape. I sprinkle a bit of baking soda on top to prevent stickage, and then use another sheet of parchment paper as a barrier on which I'll conduct my rolling duties. I basically want to get it as flat as the dough will allow, which is about as thick as my pinky finger. I smush the edges into a vague rectangle shape and start rolling it up like a cinnamon bun. If I had a magic lamp, I would ask the genie for infinite cinnamon bun cores. I tug the parchment paper over the dough to sort of lead the dough into the roll. Doing it this way should help prevent a lot of cracking. I say should because my dough ended up cracking a lot anyways. Cracks are pretty simple to fix. It looks like my white dough was a little too dry, so it cracked in some places where I smushed the green into it. I don't show it on camera, but to fix a crack, you can just sort of piece the dough together with your fingers and use a little bit of water to glue it shut. I want to make 6 pieces, so I'm slicing some markers so I have an idea of where to cut.
Rulers? No, I barely know them.
Cutting the dough feels like ASMR for your hands. There's something weirdly grounding about it. It just feels like cutting chewy Play-Doh. The first roll doesn't look too bad. I'm pretty happy with this design. In the future, I would make the dough a little wetter to prevent that sort of rippling effect the green layer has, but overall, it looks pretty nice and it smells like a fancy after dinner mint. Sometimes when you're rolling up the dough, little air pockets will get trapped. This tends to happen if the dough is a little drier and doesn't want to stick to itself. To get rid of the air pocket, you sort of need to feed it through the spiral until it reaches the end. Sometimes you could just squish the dough and it disappears, but the best thing to do for air bubbles is prevent them in the first place. So if you recreate this recipe, err on the tacky side. Like the bath bombs, I'll let those bubble bars dry with some silica gel packets for at least a week. Cornstarch likes to hold onto water, so this formula takes a little longer to dry than other bubble bar recipes. While they dry, I'll get started on the candles. For my candles, I want to do a pretty simple red and green layered design. Nothing too complicated, but still nauseatingly Christmas. I bought some 4-ounce mason jars off of Amazon, which I'll use for my candle vessels. Mason jars are great for candles because they're easily accessible, they're heat resistant, they're sturdy, and they're transparent. I've seen a lot of people on Reddit use any old random glass container for their candles and sell them, and I'm just gonna say up front, stop. Don't use any glass container for candles that isn't specifically made for candles, and don't use any glass container period if it's cracked or chipped. People sometimes forget that candles are the tail of a sleeping dragon waiting to be tickled, and that they can cause some serious damage if not respected. And scene. To prep my jars, I bought a little candle wick kit from Amazon, which comes with everything I need. Wicks, glue dots, the plastic wand, etc. For my wicks, all I need to do is place one of the pre-coated wicks inside the wand, stick a glue dot to the metal base, and then place it as center as my eyes can muster in the bottom of my jar. Voila! Now I just gotta do that 12 more times. I've decided to keep all the candles in the box they came in because the foamy insert and the cardboard flaps will help insulate the candles as they cool, giving them optimal cooling conditions. I have a huge bag of soy wax chips that I picked up from Amazon because today I'm just the poster boy for Amazon, I guess, and I'm just gonna melt 500 grams in the microwave until it's a nice syrupy wax. It's a tad hot, 84 degrees, so I'll hold off on the fragrance for now and add my colorants. I'm gonna add 2 chips of Redig Glow Lime Green. These are essentially just chips of paraffin wax that are super concentrated with candle dye. They're very potent and very cheap, so I went on a shopping spree and bought a billion of them. I'm gonna stir the wax just to encourage those dye chips to dissolve a bit, and then I'll add a 1/4 teaspoon of Margarita Mica. These 2 colors should give us a nice limey green jello solution. The wax is now 80 degrees, so that's my cue to add the fragrance. I chose Christmas Spice from Voyager, which smells like a cozy Christmas get-together, but without the relatives who like to ask you what you're doing with your life. It's a wintry cocktail of sweet apple, pine, balsam, and those wholesome Christmas spices like nutmeg and cinnamon. I'm adding 50 grams of fragrance, which will yield a 10% fragrance ratio. That's a bit on the heavy end for candles, but soy wax has a reputation for killing hot throw, so I want these candles to have the best chance of filling a small room with their wonderful aroma. I'll stir the fragrance until the wax reaches 60 degrees. This is supposedly meant to help bind the fragrance to the wax, but I'm really curious about the science of what's going on behind the scenes. Pouring the wax is just a sensory overload for my optic nerves. I love how that gooey toxic sludge shimmers and churns as it fills the container. Candle wax, next to Diet Coke, is just like the prime liquid. As my green layers succumb to the cruel and inevitable laws of thermodynamics, I'm going to prepare my red wax. It's basically just a repeat of the green layer, except I'll be using 2 cranberry chips for the color, as well as a 1/4 teaspoon rosy red mica to give that mouth-watering shimmer. I've let the green layer set up for at least an hour, just firm enough to let me pour my red on top. Like before, I'll measure 40 grams of delicious syrupy cherry Kool-Aid into each of my candle jars. At last, my candles are all ready to sleep and solidify in their fluffy foam bed. After the wax completely solidifies, I'll trim the wicks back so I can use the lids. I'll allow those to cure for 2 weeks, and while I do so, I'm gonna get started on the last gift item. Soap! I bought a sugar plum fragrance that was to unalive for, so I had to make a great soap to pair with it. I went with a simpler, swirly twirly design of blue, pink, and purple, and I'm gonna make some sugar plum embeds to decorate the top of the bar. To start on the sugar plums, I've got some clear no sweat melt and pour that is my all-time go-to for melt and pour soap. I chippity chop until I arrive at an amount I deem adequate, and throw those chunks into the microwave until liquefied. Once liquefied, I've gotta color it like a sugar plum. I had to Google what a sugar plum looks like because I'm not from the 60s where children actually would have access to those. It looks like they're a deep plum purple color. Go figure. So I'm going to use an 1/8 teaspoon Brilliant Blue Mica, a 1/4 teaspoon Neon House Party Purple powder, and a 1/16 teaspoon Black Onyx Mica. This will hopefully give me that nice deep plum purple that I'm going for. It wasn't dark enough, so I added an extra 1/8 teaspoon Black Onyx Mica. There we go. That's looking adequately plum-like. Now, I don't have a sugar plum mold because the demand for them in the year of 2024 is 0, so I'm going to use the strawberries in this assorted fruit mold that I picked up from Michael's. The strawberries have the closest shape that I imagine sugar plums to have in my head, and the sugar plums are going to be covered in faux sugar anyways, so it'll be hard to tell that they are indeed strawberries. I let those strawberry plum posters solidify and pop them out. They honestly don't look pretty bad. I think these will make pretty convincing plums. To make my quote-unquote sugar coating, I'm going to use a mix of table salt, just a couple teaspoons or so, and Super Sparkle Diamonds Mica, probably a 1/4 teaspoon, and I'll give that mixture a lesson in entropy with my spoon. Before I throw my faux plum into the faux sugar, I give it a quick spritz of rubbing alcohol so the salt will stick. You know, throwing my hands up, I think it looks like a sugar plum. I've got a lovely bunch of sugar plums all waiting to be sat in a row.
A what?
For my soap, I've got to prepare my colorants. So I'm using Pretty in Pink, about a teaspoon of that. In the Tropics, 1 teaspoon as well, except I'll run out. Luckily, I knew to restock it in advance because that blue is my fave. I'll be using Finding Marlin for the rest. For my purple, I'll use half a teaspoon Neon Purple and a 1/4 teaspoon Brilliant Blue to make it a little cooler. That Neon Purple is a very warm purple and it needs a bit of ice. I'll also add about a 1/4 teaspoon of Neon Magical Magenta powder to that Pretty in Pink there because I'm worried the pink alone won't be strong enough. Into my oil blend, I'm going to add 1 full tablespoon of titanium dioxide. This is to neutralize the rich olivey color of my oils, and I also want my color palette to be a bit more pastel. I strain the Skin ED liquid into the Skin Slimy liquid, just using that sieve as an extra measure to prevent chunks of undissolved lye getting into my soap. I blendify with my stick blender for about 20 seconds. I'm making a half batch today, which is twice as much soap as I normally make, so I can blend a little longer than I normally would. Now, the titanium dioxide makes it a bit tricky to gauge when the batter has reached trace because I can't tell if there's any unmixed oil floating around. So I really need to go the extra kilometer in making sure the batter is all incorporated and that I get a nice creme anglaise consistency. I use a scale to divide my batter into thirds, so about 400 grams each. Look at how beautiful that consistency is. This is the perfect fluidity for fancy spancy designs. I drizzle in each of my colors one by one and give them a quick stir to see how pleased I am. Honestly, those colors are perfect. I don't need to change them one bit. To each of those colors, I'll add 10 grams of my Sugar Plum Fragrance Oil, which is like the Sistine Chapel of fruity fragrances. It's strong and jammy and richly fruity with a definite sweetness, but it's not sickly. It's a wonderful, wonderful fragrance that I plan to use again in things like bath bombs, bubble bars, candles, just not soap. I'll tell you what happened later. I mixed the fragrance into my soap batter and it's behaving extremely well. No discoloration, no acceleration, the smell is wonderful, and everything about this fragrance is just a gift to all soap makers. Except, of course, for its one fatal flaw, which I'll reveal later because I'm evil. Into my half mold, I'll pour my purple, which is still beautifully fluid. Then my pink on top of that. Then my blue, which is oddly chunkier than the other colors for some reason, and I repeat that pattern until all my colors are used up and my table is sufficiently covered in raw soap. Now my Hainer tool enters the spotlight. I bring it to the very bottom of the loaf and essentially make a figure 8 folded ribbon sort of pattern all the way to the top. Once the soap has become poison pudding consistency, about 30 minutes later, I tenderly texture the top with a spoon, creating a tall crest in the middle on which I'll place my sugar plum embeds. With that said and done, my delicious sugar plum soap heads to the soap closet to hibernate for 36 hours. 36 hours later. The smell has totally disappeared. Where is it gone? To interstellar space for all I care. I've never had a fragrance that smelled so strong in the bottle just completely disappear before my very nostrils. And I blame all those people who left 5 stars on Voyager saying things like, "Work like a charm." I absolutely loved it in cold processed soap. 5 stars used in cold processed soap. Let me tell you what it smells like. Yeast. And not the good kind. It smells like bread dough that someone left in the proofer for a month. I would be okay if the soap didn't have a smell. That I could manage, but the fact that it decided to smell like something weird was just the McDonald's fry on my paper cut. Fragrance aside, I'm really hoping my swirl will redeem the soap, so let's cut it up and take a look. Also, I let the soap saponify for 3 days and it's still sticking to my hands, so something is definitely unusual about that fragrance oil. I love the smell, so I'd like to use it in a bubble bar or something, but soap is a no-go indefinitely. Okay, that hater swirl totally redeemed the smell. Those colors were basically printed from my neurons, and I love how spiky those swirls are. Looking at another bar, you can definitely see some glycerin rivers going on, which is because I used a large amount of titanium dioxide. It's a cosmetic imperfection, which I don't really mind too much. Also, look at those sugar plums. At long last, all of my gifts are ready to compile together. Let's take a look and see how they stack up against Lush. At long last, 3 weeks later, my gift bags are assembled and ready to be put out into the world. It was a gargantuan task, but it was a super fun process. But was it worth it? I know you all are probably itching in your computer chairs or toilet, anxious to see the first test. But first I want to crunch some numbers. Am I saving any money by making all of these products myself? To start, I'm going to assemble a custom gift bag on the Lush website. For the bath bomb, I'm choosing Star of Wonder because its shape and function are most similar to my Snowflake bath bomb. That'll be $9 Canadian for 95 grams. For the bubble bar, I've chosen Snow Fairy Roll, which is $14 for 200 grams. I chose Honey I Wash the Kids for the candle, which is single wick and costs $16 for 200 grams, being one of the cheaper candles on their shelf. Lastly, for the soap, I've chosen the Comforter, which is a good in-between, not too cheap, not too expensive. That's $9 for 100 grams of soap. Choosing their gift option adds $9.50 for the medium size, which gives us a total shopping expenditure of $65 Canadian after tax. Except that's not all. I need 12 times that amount, which drives my subtotal up to $576 Canadian and my taxes to $69, which ultimately amounts to $645.12 Canadian. I like my friends, but I don't like them that much. Tallying up the totals for my own creations, my Snowflake bath bomb costs $1 in supplies at 85 grams. Gram for gram, this was the cheapest product to make. My bubble bar costs $3.30 for 140 grams. My candle costs $3.80 for 200 grams, which includes the price of the jar and the wick materials. And the soap costs $3.56 Canadian for 120 grams, and gram for gram is the most expensive product I made. Something to note is minus the candle, all of my products have different weights compared to the Lush counterparts, so I made sure to integrate that into the coming price comparison. Tallying the numbers up, it looks like my gift set would cost only around $13.66 Canadian in materials, which is a quarter of the cost of the Lush gift box I assembled. Scaled up to 12 people, that's about $164 in cost, which is much less tear-inducing than Lush's hefty $645 price tag. So you might be thinking, wow, Chris, that's such a steal. And while you would be correct in making that assumption, we have to give Lush a bit of credit here. For their products, you're paying for the branding, you're paying for consistency, you're paying for tried and tested fragrances that don't magically disappear once they're in soap. And let's be honest, in my opinion, Lush's products are prettier, except for the soap. My soap is better. However, cheaper doesn't always mean better. Let's see how my products perform. With all of my products laid out before me, my first impression is very positive. Judging the visual appearance, I'm proud of everything except the bubble bar. Poor bubble bar. Everything else looks groovy though. If I saw these on a shelf in a store, I'd definitely want to sniff them. To dress them up for their journey out of the house, I had my Cricut cut out some gift box templates tailored to the dimensions of each product, and then I smacked on a label I created myself. While the boxes are made of plain 176 GSM cardstock, they add an extra layer of protection to the gifts, and I think they're pretty alright. However, scaling boxes for business is just impractical unless I have an assistant, just because it's a task that boasts an appetite for time. One by one, let's review each bath product. I called my bath bomb Snow Day because I feel like it represents that joyous moment when you run to the hills with your uber cool foam sled that your parent or guardian got from Costco after the first snowfall. It's woodsy, it's sparkly, but let's take a look at how it behaves in the bath. Before we do, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my soap universe and ring the bell for notifications for when I upload fun content. Placing the snowflake in the water, gently, I'm overjoyed with the results. Because the snowflake has pointed white tips, it actually leaves a pretty interesting star pattern in the water. Since this is a slow-moving recipe, this bath bomb took about 12 minutes to dissolve, and it left my bath a gorgeous cloudy blue with super sparkly diamond snowflakes fluttering about. I just can't get over how much I love Snow Day. It's just, mwah. Crafter's kiss. Next in line is my bubble bar, Candy Cane Lane, which is a name inspired by a street in my hometown Edmonton whose residents would go ham wild on Christmas decorations as soon as it started snowing in the month of July. Sarcasm. As far as appearance and smell go, it's not cute. Those red and greens bled into the white a bit, it looks like a potato, and it smells like peppermint mixed with toast. Let's hope this bubble bar is the ugly book cover secretly hiding the Fellowship of the Ring. To use one of my bubble bars, I break it in half and then crumble one of the halves into a sieve, trying to get it as powdery as possible. That's the benefit of these bubble bars, they can bubble fight 2 whole baths. I run the powder under the warm water until everything dissolves, and as soon as that happens, I get in there and aggressively work the water myself. My goal is to agitate the water as much as I can before the bath is full. If you skip this step, you'll get bubbles, but they won't be nearly as impressive. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Look at all those bubbles. Next is my layered candle. I called it Holiday because it reminds me of a glorious mix of warm, cozy spice and sweet pear with some woodsy balsam and pine thrown in there. Essentially every Christmas scent you can think of minus the peppermint. I let the candle burn for around half an hour or so the melt pool hasn't reached the jar yet, but I tested a different holiday candle earlier and it melted all the way to the edge, so it should be fine. I will begrudgingly admit, the hot throw isn't the strongest, and I blame that partially on using soy wax, but the smell exists and it's a pretty candle to have around. Lastly, we have my sugar plum soap, which I so deftly named Frosted Plums so that people would understand what that purple thing is sitting on top. I'm not going to wash with it because I want to give this one away, but it's soap. The only thing is it doesn't smell like a sweet jammy fruit, it smells most strangely unusual. So that wraps up my holiday gift set. Were any of these creations your favorites? Would you rather buy from Lush or Bath & Body Works, or would you prefer to make everything yourself? Leave a comment down below. That was our journey in the soap universe. Thank you for watching, and bubble bye.